For the past few weeks in our parish, beginning during the Lenten season and continuing through the Easter season, we've had a Bible study. And the Bible study has looked at the corporal works of mercy and how we find them lived in the Scriptures. And each week we usually have some kind of saint, or if not a saint, certainly a powerful figure from our Catholic faith, who has lived these words. Most recently, we actually looked at a woman by the name of Molly Rogers, who may be better known to some of you who love the missions as Mother Mary Joseph. She was the founder of the Maryknoll Missions. And she was somebody who was very enthusiastic. You know, whenever you see a picture of her, she has a very big smile on her face. She seems to be, in many ways, a larger-than-life personality. But she also had a great love for the people all over the world, especially those who hadn't heard the words of the gospel and those who were living in poverty. The first mission that she was involved in was in China, because that's where the Maryknolls first went. And at first they had great successes, and there were many converts, and it seemed like almost everything that they could do seemed to be like touching something and turning into gold. They were particularly effective because at that time in China, if you were a male and you were not related to a woman, you were not allowed to speak to her. But their founding an order of nuns, along with the priests and the brothers, they were able to work in conjunction and do great things. But yet also, too, she knew suffering. Because while the first years for the missionaries were very successful, not too long afterward, there were a number of revolutions and a number of uprisings. And many of the Maryknoll priests and nuns found themselves in jail, where they were severely mistreated, in many cases tortured, and in few cases martyred. It was a very challenging and difficult time. And when the order was expelled from China, they weren't quite sure of what to do. But yet, Mother Mary Joseph, being a woman of prayer, and also somebody who had, in many ways, the missionary spirit of St. Paul, prayed for a solution. And that's when they began working in Latin America and throughout Africa and other countries in Asia. She truly believed in the importance of service. And of course, while she's not a saint, although maybe one day she will be, she follows the example of so many of our great saints. People said to St. Vincent de Paul, St. Louise de Marillac, St. Francis of Assisi, so many who knew the importance of serving others. And I think certainly if we look at the importance of service and serving in the name of Jesus Christ, our first reading and a gospel give us some insight. In the first reading, St. Paul gets up and is asked to speak. And he speaks a bit about salvation history, about God appointing certain people throughout the ages, and then ends with John the Baptist, and quotes the famous line from John the Baptist, that one mightier than I is coming. I'm not worthy to loosen the straps of his sandals. Then we go to the gospel that we hear today, and we hear about the one that John the Baptist said he was not, that he was greater and not worthy to loosen his sandals. And what do we find Jesus doing? He's just finished washing the feet of his followers, of the apostles who were at the Last Supper, and is instructing them to go out and do the same, to go out and serve. So we have in our first reading a recognition of Jesus Christ being the great one who was so mighty and so great, God's only begotten Son, that we're not even worthy to loosen his sandals. But yet we see Jesus in the gospel as a servant, serving the needs of others and calling his followers to do the same. And I think it reminds us that, certainly it's important to be serving the needs of others. In doing so, we're recognizing the greatness of Jesus Christ, but we're also following his example. And that is something that is very important. And so maybe when we're called upon to do for others, to kind of look at it in light of this gospel, how we're alleviating the suffering of others and bring the light of Christ into situations where it may not always be found. Remembering that we're following the example of Jesus, who at his Last Supper washed his disciples' feet. But yet I also think, too, that as we're hearing this gospel, and thinking about the community that may be joining us in Mass, many people, turn on their computer and maybe they take a coffee break at work and enjoy the Mass. Some people may be watching it a little bit later. All sorts of people may be joining us. But there might be some who are joining us, but the reason why they're joining us is they're not able to get out. They're not able to do things for others. They're not able to do what the gospel commands. But I think you are, whether you may not always realize it. If you're being cared for, if you have to rely on others, maybe a way to think about it is you're giving them the opportunity to be the presence of Christ. You're giving them the opportunity to live this gospel. You're giving them the opportunity to serve. And so if we look at it in that way, all of us, whether we're serving others, whether we're the recipients of service of others, we're following the example of Jesus Christ.